Hello. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Martinet Lee, and today I'm going to be talking about designing Zircuit, the L2 that prevents hack. I will talk very fast because I actually have close to like 60 slides, and I'll just like rush through. Cool. So this is the overview. Talk about the rollups, and then like what we do on the Zircuit for the technical design, and then what SLS can be used for as other stuff, and then some other challenges aside from the SLS design itself. So a little bit quick overview about myself. So I used to be security auditor and audited Ethereum, Avalanche, and also Binance Smart Chain. Also audited a lot of like smart contract system like Yearn Finance, etc. Right now, I also serve at Zircuit, leading some like product and technical development, and as a university lecturer at NYCU, a technical university in Taiwan. So we all know there's a ton of rollups, right? And what's the point of them? Like right now, there's like more than 100 active rollups, and then even more in development, right? So the view of Zircuit is kind of like, we can summarize in this way. Like one, there's going to be multi-chain, or multiple like layer twos, and every chain is going to target like different use cases, etc. What we see is that, yes, EVM compatible is nice and all that, right? But it's not the end game because you can offer something more and as feature. Like, in the beginning of this whole conference, we have Aztec, which is offering privacy, and it's not EVM it's not EVM, right? And so, like, all these things are basically saying that, hey, we're bringing value by doing something more, right? And rollups are basically middleware that allows and enables like apps to develop something more interesting. And basically, if you view it this way, then we'll start to think about, okay, what else can rollup provide aside from just scalability and then fast, right? So Aztec provides privacy, which is awesome, and this is also where we come in as well. And I think this is kind of like the goal, and then kind of like trend for future L2s. So you see some of the L2s talk about super high performance, etc. And for us, Zircuit, well, we're coming from kind of like a secure background, so we see there's a lot of different hacks, right? All these just hacks happening this year, and definitely not up to date because they keep happening. And so from a secure background, we started to look at it and think about like, hey, can the chain actually have an active role in ensuring the security for its own users, right? And so this is actually coming from research of QuantStamp itself. So back in the days, we were thinking of, okay, to actually be able to audit like a rollup, right? We need to understand it, and what's best to understand it by trying to build it, right? And while we're building it, so we got quite a few like research grants from EF, but while we're doing all this, we realized that, hey, actually there's something more that we can do. So it is interesting that like the previous speaker was talking about like a centralization. So I have a little bit different view there, which is like, if we have the layer one as a very decentralized part, and here on layer two, the structure is centralized, can we opt in a little bit more on that and say that, hey, this is kind of like a design space that we're going for, and then we try to provide users, be that user retail or institutions, give them some more features that makes them more comfortable to be on-chain, to ready for them to be on-chain, and then later to be like maybe fully decentralized, right? So there are these things that that we think of like, hey, sequencer can be directly involved. We can do transaction simulation before it actually lands and determine whether it is something bad is happening. There could be circuit breakers. So now let's kind of like quickly go over the basic transaction flow of an L2. I'm sure a lot of people already know this, which is you have transactions that's sent to the sequencer. Sequencer decides whether where to order it, and you put it into the block, and then you just package them onto the L2, right? You commit the state and all that to the L2. Sorry, L1. As L2, that's what the sequencer does. So how does Zircuit work? High-level concept, very simple. So this is kind of like the only place that we can. So we have an AI that basically scans all the transaction, determine whether it is malicious or abnormal or normal transaction. And if it is abnormal, then we quarantine it. The only place that makes sense for AI is basically the sequencer right here. And so that's where it scans. We can probably do it here. Yeah, so Zircuit's main goal, right, is to basically the user security and dApp security. So this AI, we put it in the sequencer, and it sees all the transactions, because as a sequencer, it does that. And we simulate all that transaction. The malicious transaction flow, we simulate it and then say, like, hey, this looks malicious. Then we put it in a quarantine zone. Yeah, so that's kind of like the flow of it. Right now, when we're looking at the practical cases, it's relatively small, compared to all transaction on blockchain. So on Zircuit, this is how it works. Transaction goes to the sequencer. Sequencer basically can view this AI as an oracle, basically asking whether it is safe or not, and then it returns that yes, it is safe. Then it goes to the normal. If it's no, then it goes to quarantine. So this L2, all the safe ones that goes to L2 blocks are then packaged to L1. So that's basically Zircuit itself. This is a little bit more detailed. So the quarantine transactions actually right after it comes like with a release criterion. And release criterion, there's like time-based. You can also do different stuff with it, which could be interesting for some. Let's say if you're an entity, legitimate entity that worry that your transaction can maybe like quote unquote censored in this way, then you can register, do some sort of like KYB stuff, and then we know who you are, and people know who you are. If you do bad things, then your identity will be revealed. So this is one way that you can do it. You can also do it in kind of like a staking mechanism way. So the simulation of ours not only knows that it is normal or abnormal, it actually also checks like how much damage that you are doing, right? And so if you have a stake of, let's say, 10 million, and the estimated damage here is like 1 million. Most likely you're not doing any like damage, because otherwise you're like, like this 10 million, that stuff, like it's gonna be gone, right? So there's like different mechanisms that we can implement here. So just double click on that a little bit. So that all sounds kind of high level and nice and simple, but the actual challenges for doing or designing such a sequencer or AI, there's data set, and there's the performance of model execution, there's network security, there's maintenance. So obviously this is basically just AI challenges, right? So not unique for Zircuit, but if we incorporate the AI, then there's these. Data collection wise, it's okay, because in our case, we have like a lot of like transactions across different EVM blockchains, right? And there has been hundreds of exploits from before, right? And so we use them to train the model from the experimental data, like we have low false positive rate, low false negative rate, so like pretty good, and that's why we start to use it. And then in practical experience, like around like 12 quarantine transactions over 13.5 million blockchain transactions. So right now, basically, these quarantine transactions, they're like false positive. So there's very, very low false positive rate right there. Cool. So on the performance side, so transaction level introspection is non-negligible. So there's a couple things I want to chat here. So if you look at like the requirement of optimism or like these rollups, you want to build like blocks every 2 seconds, right? And so that basically means like so this is just like a way of estimating. Like there's obviously not necessarily this way, but let's say if we use like the block gas consumption, etc., those kind of things to estimate. Basically, every block you want like a 20 free transaction on average. And so how to design Zircuit. From the requirement side, you want an EVM chain that has a single block producer, which is the sequencer. You want a block that has a constant rate that pushes the block every up to 2 seconds. And then blocks, as the typical kind of like sequencer L2 or blockchain, it has to be able to host 30 million gas units and also scans every transaction block for intents. And we don't want any hacks to go through. Some of them, all of them combined together is actually very hard. So the first design decision is what level and what granularity should the simulations be performed. So there's one thing, actually two things, two choices that you can do. One is scan each transaction individually when they're in the mempool. The other thing is you need to scan the entire block while you sequence them already, right? Independently, so this is what we call SLS 1.0. which is scanning transactions independently. So you can parallelize all the scanning. That's all fine. You can have multiple machines running them. And you can act before block formation, which is awesome. But then what it fails is that there's transaction dependencies, right? So if there is kind of a hack that depends on some state, then this is one way to kind of bypass that thing. This is the way to hide hacks, essentially. And this is how it may look like these dependent transaction. Transaction 1 is if this account has some balance, then execute something, else don't execute it. The other transaction is literally fund that. And so depending on how you form the block, right, whether transaction 2 happens or not, hey, this transaction 1 can be malicious or not, right? So this is, if we only implement this, then this is not good for catching all the hacks, right? So now we have SLS 2.0, which is scanning the entire block, right? You, as a sequencer, single-form sequencer, you know how the block was formed, and you have right now the dependency doesn't matter because you already formed them and you're simulating the whole thing, right? So if you can identify the hack, like if the machine learning model is well trained, then you won't miss it. Great. Now, there's issue with this, which is trace for simulating is much larger. Scanning also takes time, and parallelization might be hard. And when a block is bad, basically, when we simulate this block and then see that hey, there's actually malicious stuff happening, what do you do, right? We need to keep in mind that we also want to keep the performance there, like every 2 seconds or 500 milliseconds is pushing out a block. So here comes SLS 3.0, which is, okay, let's do some guessing work and then allow some reorgs, right? And so here we're basically forming them optimistically, boom, boom, boom. So we're like, okay, if we've done these things and then we do the block level simulation and it comes back and says hey, this one is actually bad, then we kind of roll it back. But we are assuming that it is good beforehand, and whenever there's bad things happening, which is rare, then it goes back. So this can result in some liveness problems. So then right now, the architecture in Zircuit basically looks like this. There's kind of 2 levels. SLS 1.0 kind of removes a lot of the immediate malicious ones, and then SLS 2 just do the whole block simulation. So SLS 1 basically helps us reduce the probability of bad blocks, but we work with reorg and all that. So that's with the SLS 3. So yeah, that's a quick one. So this is what we have. Sorry, this is what we have right now, and then this is SLS 3 will be here, which is we will allow reorg, so still have a scanning beforehand before they go to mempool, and then decreases the probability of bad blocks, and then with SLS 3, then we allow reorg and basically be more performant as well. Cool. So if you can spot a hack, then it will not make it through. Now you have a design that sort of makes this possible, right? But then the second question comes is can you spot a hack really well? And Zircuit, as I mentioned earlier, we use AI to do that stuff. There's interesting research kind of like thing around this. So if you look at just Zircuit itself, it's obviously a rather new chain. No project on the network has ever suffered an attack. But how do we then like train an AI model, right? It sounds simple that, as I mentioned earlier, like you just train it throughout like the other EVM chains. But there's actually some, these are the things that we can use, right? Like these other EVM chains, 50 plus more EVM networks. And then there's like public database of hacks. And we are also auditors. We know how to reproduce and all that. But still, training the models comes with different challenges. These are just the result, false negative rates. Right now, it's misses 1 in 200 real hacks. So, just pretty good number. False positive rate is also really good. As I mentioned earlier, like with we only have like 12 across like 13.5 million transactions. So this is good. The model itself needs to be maintained over time. So there's always new hacks. So you need to like update that model itself. The kind of mental model I use for Zircuit is actually like it's a layer 2 with antivirus. And for antivirus, you basically need to like update that antivirus and signature all the time, keep it up to date. That's kind of like the one quick way to think about it. And so retraining and modernization is necessary, obviously. So there's a lot of maintenance thing, but also testing the model, how it performed after each of this iteration is very important. And there's actually a lot of transference issues. This is the issue that I kind of like hinted earlier. So, if you do it in a naive way, the models couldn't just learn like, hey, if it's chain ID like 48900, which is Zircuit, then just like say there's no hack, and that is not how it should be, right? So how do you test that? So there's a lot of so Zircuit, the basic things like we use damn vulnerable DeFi kind of as the basic case. There's also a lot of like the real hacks that we also ported. But one of the things one of the main challenges here for testing this thing on Zircuit is that there are state transfer challenges, right? So the same contract that was vulnerable on Ethereum or other chains, they may have these things, right? So like hard-coded addresses or like reference to other protocols, etc. And so you have to also somehow have that and replicate that or transfer all these things onto Zircuit as well. So this is very like some of the challenges that we needed to solve, which we did. But just so that you get a quick scope of like the challenges and things that you need to do for designing and then executing and kind of like testing, ongoing testing like such a system like Zircuit, right? So that's kind of like on the technical design side. SLS, so sequencer level security, it can also use for some other things as well. Advanced phishing prevention, this is not only to look at hacks, but like you can look at phishing kind of like behavioral kind of things, and you can incorporate them. Then, let me just skip that. You can also consider receiving some input from AI agent. Not my, I'm not a fan of this idea, but like, it's an idea. There's also rule-based transacting, like different enterprises can decide their own rules on Zircuit itself for their smart contracts, for KYC, KYB purposes. So here is probably kind of like a good time to quickly talk about like the philosophy or thinking around Zircuit as an L2, right? So one, obviously L2 right now is a centralized architecture. There could be pathways to decentralize. There's also pathway to just double click on centralization. What we think, and also like my personal belief, so I come from also an educational background. If we want the whole world to adapt to the decentralized world, so I'm also a decentralized maxi, you don't ask every one of them to do a leap of faith. To like, hey, get on this, it's amazing, there's no political capture, but your funds may lose. Because that's literally the first thing they see when they open up like Web3 and is it secure, whatever, right? And so if you want to make them comfortable, like institutions and everyone like really comfortable onto the path of total decentralization, you need to, one, make them feel comfortable about stepping in, use the tool, get really amazed and then about the experience, get really used to that. And then they will also then, like the next step, they'll figure out the philosophical stuff about like, hey, maybe there's like political things I need to consider. Then if those are the people, they will go to a decentralized place, right? So Zircuit's kind of like thesis and theory is that to be able to bring the whole world, actually the whole world, on chain, you need to ramp them up with some sort of like control that they're comfortable with. And this is also like, the basis of sequencer level security, like having an antivirus on this computer. Yes, it is more or less on the spectrum of more centralization, but does give them more protection. And here is also giving enterprises, institutions more options on the control as well. So rule-based, you can do a lot of like these things. So right now, if institutions are trying to do blockchain, they either spin up their own L2s, right? And then fuck up sometimes. So I think a lot of people know like there's some enterprises that did that, and then they try to censor meme coin launch, and then people use escape hatches to still launch the meme coin. And so these are one thing. Like they need developer that really be able to know how to operate this, right? And so adds complexity for like those stuff. And then the other issue is that if every enterprise launches their own L2 and stuff, then there is liquidity fragmentation. Interops is obviously one challenge that we're trying to solve at this moment. If it exacerbated, then it's not good, right? And so ideally, if you have a place where they can just customize their own rules, then this might help with the problem, right? And so here, what they can do, KYC, KYB, as I mentioned, require users to be citizen of Singapore, proof of personhood, whatever, all these stuff, you can name it. Yeah, so, and kind of like summary for the enterprises, retains composability across these like special rules project, saving engineering time, and then use battle-tested code without modifying. Like, let's say if you want to launch a Uniswap, that only allows Singaporean citizens to transact on it. This is one way to do it, right? On Zircuit, you can't do that because you don't need to modify Uniswap at all, right? Otherwise, you'll need to, and then you need to audit it, and still it's not necessarily secure. There's a lot of other challenges for designing Zircuit. I only focused on, like the SLS part, like the sequencer itself. But there's actually synchronization issues across all different nodes. There's how do we kind of like think about the forced inclusion, deposit transactions, deal with attacks for sure. Also, user and developer experience, how to make sure that it's really good and also maintain it so that it's almost the same as a normal EVM. Toolkit for these correction and circuit breaking, decentralization. Here, what I mean by decentralization, there are two things. One is how, like the actual decentralization, like in the, our ethos kind of term, but there's also the decentralization of the like machine, like the running the machine stuff. So there's those two aspects. Then obviously the challenges I sort of mentioned on the maintenance one is the new detectors and models. So there's a lot of work on working on Zircuit, but it's also very, very fun and challenging. So I sped running. That's great. I think we finished like almost like 50 slides. Thank you guys so much for joining me. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, man. Is there any question?
Hey, thank you so much for your speech.
Of course, sir.
It was awesome. But let me ask, like, so this sequencer is like basically like filtering out some malicious intended transactions, right? That's the
right.
idea. And I'm curious, like, so current status quo, like we are putting all of our trust, like 100% of the trust to code, right? actual like code deployed to the blockchain. So I guess I'm curious. Now maybe like this approach would like shift the trust away from the actual code deployed to this like machine learning model. And also like curious if like sequencer like blocking transactions wouldn't be like also possible to do that on actual like contract deployment step instead of like intercepting all transactions, but detecting like in a similar fashion, you know, like detecting smart contracts where this kind of like manipulations could occur, you know. I guess that's what I am like curious about.
Yeah. So the first question was around. Sorry, I have a very very short term memory. So maybe let me answer the. Yeah, if you can, if you can.
Yeah. So like right now we put 100% of the trust with the
Right.
actual code deployed.
Okay, I remember now. So there are two things there. So the reason we do this is not to shift the trust to the machine learning model, but you know, me as experience as an auditor, we see actually a lot of super experienced and senior smart contract engineers. They do an update on their protocol, and it's literally like 3 lines of update, and then 500 million got hacked. And why is that? There's kind of like a mismatch there because like when a developer does 3 lines of update, although it might impact like the whole protocol, they're not going to pay the audit for the whole protocol, right? And so there's kind of like a mismatch there. And also like they're super rigid, right? Still super rigid like team and like, well, you know, senior. So we see that there's actually, even for these senior developers, there's chance for these mistakes to happen. And unfortunately, these mistakes are irreversible, right? There's, on top of my head, I can already think of like at least 3 or 4 different examples that suffered this kind of attack and protocol never recovered from it. There's one that recovered. But other than that, like basically company got GG, right? And so that is basically the motivation of this additional stuff, which is like, okay, like it's sort of going back to the analogy of antivirus. It's not that you shouldn't trust or like this code developer a program shouldn't write good code. But in case they did something wrong, you have antivirus saying that, hey, stop, I blocked it for you, right? So that is basically like one of the reasons like we worked on this. Yeah, and maybe the second one?
The second one was like the sequencer right now, like intercepting transactions, and wouldn't be also possible to do that on like code deployment step? Like?
Yeah, so the way that we do it, and this is getting a little bit more deeper into how we do things, is we do the transaction analysis. We do take into account like the contract bytecode, but if it's malicious intent, like typically they also won't really verify it, and there's also ways to kind of like mask that as well. But transaction analysis is much more easier. It's on the spot, like you look at the simulation result and you kind of know what it does and what it actually like interacts with, et cetera, et cetera. So the behavioral of transaction is much easier to kind of clarify the intent. And here, it's easier to say malicious or not malicious, but in reality, it's normal and abnormal kind of like transactions because like they don't know what is malicious. Yeah, thank you for your question.
Okay, looks like one more question.
Hi. You said like we're checking the transactions by AI. So
Yep.
I'm gonna ask, do you have any rules that like what is a malicious transaction or not? For example, like generally a transaction is like usually has 0% tax. Like, but some of the like contracts has like 20 or 30 tax. Like, do you consider this as a malicious transaction, or like do you revert it? What do you
So here is the interesting part. We don't dictate or write any rules. It's not rule-based. It's model learning. So I don't know what it actually learned. The model learned something, but I can tell you what feature we gave it, right? So when you simulate the transaction, there's like all the transaction traces. So that's one thing. The other thing is you can also, from all those transaction traces, you can summarize like the asset exchange between different assets, right? Like, sorry, asset exchange between different addresses, etc. There's also like the protocol that you're interacting with. You know, like if it's all in one protocol or like in different protocols, like all these things with tags, etc. Like that just adds to the feature set. And all these things are combined and feed into, so that basically what it does, like during the learning phase, we give this machine learning model. Actually, there's more than one. There's like different versions of it, and then there's some aggregation around that, but that's too detailed. You basically had all these like feature set and send it to this to learn, right? And so what it learns, I don't know, but what it is able to do is you give it a normal transaction and an abnormal transaction. It tells you that, hey, this is abnormal, that is normal, right? And so back to the original question is we don't code those roles directly. We don't know what it learned. But the way that we kind of tested, I also mentioned it earlier, basically with the normal transaction and all the kind of like those state transferred like thing to test it out, like have an end-to-end testing on its performance, etc. Hopefully that answers the question. Thank you, sir.
Okay, that's it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
This is the last talk before the last section.